Today we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter number 18. But let's look back at the last lesson. In the last lesson we saw how David defeated Goliath, the Philistine, through God's power. Not through his own power, but through God's power. In today's lesson we're going to see what happens next in David's life. And we're going to see these three main things that happen in this chapter. And that is David gets a new friend, a new job, and a new family. Well, the first few verses is going to be him getting a new friend. Let's look at verse number 1. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. David and Jonathan became friends. This friendship, Jonathan is Saul's son. This friendship worked well because they had the same beliefs in God. They both believed in the power of God. And we have seen this in previous lessons. If you look where Jonathan believed in the power of God, you can see that in 1 Samuel 14, verse 6, which says, And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, let us go over unto this garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord, to save by many or by few. We also have seen David's belief in the power of God, and that is in 1 Samuel 17, verse number 37, which says, David said, Moreover, the Lord hath delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear. He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with you. Jonathan and David both believed that God was all-powerful, and this made their friendship work well. When we look for friends, we should look for friends that have the same belief in God as us. And this principle is found in Psalm chapter 1. This is more of a thing that tells you what friends not to get. But it also tells you the opposite would be the type of friends that you would need to get. That's Psalm 1, verse 1. Which says, Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. That's what it says in Psalm 1. This verse tells us so we should choose friends that do not give us bad advice. So don't stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of the scornful, or what that means is be around people who are scornful, or walk in the way of the wicked. But instead, we should choose godly friends. And that's the principle we see in the friendship with Jonathan. Now let's look at the second verse, which is verse number 2. And Saul took him that day, or David is the him there, and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Saul took David away from his pasture and his father, and gave him work at the palace. So now he would work for Saul instead of going back home again to work in the field. Let's see what Jonathan did with David. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of his robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. Jonathan showed his friendship for David by giving him the things that only a king would have. He showed him that he really cared for David, and their friendship was strong. That was David's new friend. Now we're going to see David's new job, and that is found in verse number 5. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. David was Saul's special agent / general. Saul would assign David to a specific missions and to fight over battles, and David would carry them out. And wherever Saul sent David, David went and did it the right way. And this caused people to respect David. And he did it in God's power. If we do things well and are wise in our dealings, people will respect us as well. And this principle is found in Proverbs 22. Verse number 29, which says, "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings, he shall not stand before mean men." This verse tells us that if we're diligent in what we do, then we'll be respected and we won't stand before mean men. But this principle is also found in the New Testament, in Colossians 3. Verse number 23. Which says, "And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord, and not unto men." If we work or do anything do any task that we are given, then we should give God the glory, and we should also do it heartily and work hard and do it right. Amen. If we do this, then people will most likely respect us. But in our passage where we see the people went a little bit too far in showing their respect for David. And that sort of caused a problem. We'll see that in verse number 6, which says, "And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. The people placed David in a higher position of respect than Saul. How do you think Saul is going to respond to this? Saul responded in 3 ways that were all the wrong way to respond to this. And the first one was that Saul was jealous of David. And that's in verse number 8. And Saul was very wroth, and this saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more than the kingdom? Saul was jealous of the praise that David was getting from the people. We should, on the other hand, not be jealous of others' success. This will often cause us to make rash decisions. And this is what happened to Saul. This leads us to what Saul's second wrong response was, which was Saul's jealousy led him to anger. And we see this in verses 9 through 11. And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul. And he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with the hand, as at other times. And there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided his presence twice. Saul's jealousy caused him to be angry and to hate David. And this eventually led to him trying to kill David. If we let our jealousy get out of control in our lives, it will cause us to do wrong things as well. And this principle is found in James 3. James chapter number 3, verse number 16, which says, For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. Anger is the natural result of jealousy, and we should attempt to stay clear of both jealousy and the anger that is caused by it. And the third thing that Saul did that was not the right response was Saul was afraid of David. And that is verse number 12, which says, "And Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul." Saul was afraid of David because David had the power of God instead of Saul. If we see that someone else has God's power in their life, then this should not cause us to be angry or afraid of them. It should just encourage us to do more things for Christ ourselves. Instead of getting jealous, Saul should have tried to get right with God himself. Instead, he was fearful and jealous of the power that David had through God. These are the three ways that Saul responded wrong to David's success as his general. And that takes us to verse number 14, which says, "And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him." Even though David had gained the respect of the people, he did not stop doing things the right way. Instead, he continued to make wise decisions and do the right thing. This showed that David was not just putting on a show. Instead, it showed that he had good character. He didn't stop doing the right thing after the people had given him respect. He continued on. And we see that before and after. And even after Saul had tried to kill him. And that leads us to verse number 15 and 16. "Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them." When the people saw that David continued to serve God even after Saul was mad at him and he had gained the respect of Israel, they loved him even more, and this caused Saul to even be more afraid. And that is a result of David being consistent and following God in all the different things. So then that leads us to the third thing that we see about David, and that is David's new family or wife. And that is in verse number 17. "And Saul said to David, Behold, mine elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him." Saul said that if David was willing to fight hard for him and for God, then he would give David his oldest daughter. But Saul's actual plan was to cause David to fight hard and for him to be killed in combat. Saul wanted the Philistines to kill David, so he did not have to. He wanted to put the blame on someone else, but to get rid of David. And that leads us to verse number 18, which says, "And David said unto Saul, Who am I, and what is my life, or my father's house and family in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" When David was given this offer, he said that he was not worthy. This shows that David had humility. This was one of the character traits that David had that we should have too, because God blesses those who have humility. And we see that he says, I am not worthy to be, he says, actually, "What is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" And we'll see later that he says, "I am not worthy," I think. Yeah, he does. He says in verse number... Did he say I'm not worthy anymore?
That's kind of who am I?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's the same thing as...
yeah, I thought he said it somewhere in here, though. We'll get to that eventually, if it's in there. And when David was given the offer, he said he was not worthy. This showed his humility. And the principle that God blesses those who have humility is found in James chapter 4. And verse number 10, which says, "Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up." David was humble, and this caused him to be exalted in the eyes of others and in the eyes of God. And it also helped him keep from making bad decisions. And that leads us to verse number 19, which says, "And it came to pass that the time when Merab Saul's daughter should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel the Meholathite to wife. Even though David fought well for Saul, Saul still gave his daughter to someone else to be his wife. He broke his promise, but he had a backup plan. Saul had a backup plan. And that is in verse 20 and 21. And it says, And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him to her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. Saul decided to give David his younger daughter, Michal. As we see that Saul must have not thought very highly of his daughter Michal, because we see why he chose her for David in verse number 21. And it says that she may be a snare to him. Saul offered to give Michal to David because he wanted her to be a snare unto him. And this leads us to verse number 22. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. Saul told his servants to secretly tell him that Saul wanted him to be his son-in-law. And let's see David's reaction to the proposition. And that is in verse number 23. And Saul's servants spake these words in the ears of David. And David said, Seemeth it to you a light thing to be the king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? David responded by saying that he was not worthy and that he was a poor man, which was sort of saying that he could not pay the dowry for the king's daughter. And we'll see how Saul solved this problem. He must have been really trying to get rid of his daughter. I don't know why. When Saul heard David's response, he came up with a way that he thought David could earn this right. So David said, I can't afford the dowry. So Saul came up with a mission that David could complete to perform the dowry. And he said, and that's in verse number 25. And Saul said, Thus shall you say unto David, The king desireth not a dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be avenged for the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So in every mission that he's giving David, he's trying to get him to fight the Philistines so that the Philistines kill him. So he's making the mission really hard, so then David will die in battle and he won't have to deal with him anymore. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. So when Saul heard David was willing to complete the mission to earn his wife, Saul thought that while completing the mission, David might be killed. And this is why he decided to give this task to David. Let's see how it turned out. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. David completed the mission, and this time Saul followed through and gave David his daughter as a reward. And that brings us to verse number 28. And Saul saw that and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Saul saw that when Saul saw that David completed the mission, he knew that David was protected by God. He knew that since he could complete such a hard mission and not be killed, that God was with him. This made Saul even more afraid than ever, and he would be David's enemy from this point on. And that takes us to verse number 30. And the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by, or set by means, according to this, it means esteemed. Even, or made exalted, or made set high. Yeah. Keep naming synonyms. Even the enemies of Israel, we see in here the Philistines, the enemies of Israel saw that God was with David, and they respected him. They saw that he behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that even his enemies esteemed him. If we do things the right way and give God the glory for what we do, then it will even cause some of our enemies to respect us. This is what happened to David. In conclusion, in today's lesson, we learned about what was happening next, the next step in David's life. We learned about his new friend, Jonathan, his new job, which was in Saul's army, and his new wife, which was the daughter of Saul. So we're going to go back.